Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Rich Allen and Peter Rutzler. Love is in the air, and pancakes will soon be in our bellies this week, but that also signals the return of European action. But a little on PSG's big match and another exciting Ligue 1 weekend after the latest headlines. Saint-Etienne put an end to Marseille's upward trajectory as they came from behind twice to draw 2-2 at the Stade Geoffroy Guichard. Substitute Kostas Mitroglou had a chance late on to win it, but the Greek international missed from a few yards out, sending the team back into third. On Saturday, Paris Saint-Germain prepared for their Champions League clash with Real Madrid this week with a 1-0 win at Toulouse. The home side's big crowd helped them keep Neymar and company out for the majority of the match, with a deflected goal by the Brazilian being the difference on the day. In the multiplex, Monaco kept their momentum going as they beat lowly Angers 4-0 with a double from Stefan Jovetic that sends them into second in the table. Elsewhere, Dijon came from behind to beat Nice 3-2 in a game marred by a yellow card given to Mario Balotelli, protesting about racial chanting, as Bordeaux held on to win by the same scoreline against Amiens. Montpellier held on to win 1-0 at Metz, while Guingamp and Caen finished goalless, with Clément Grenier having his first start in nearly 2 years. On Sunday, Strasbourg pulled off a big win against Troyes 2-1, as Nicolas Pepe scored in the final minute for Lille to earn a 2-2 draw away to Nantes. In Sunday's final match, Rennes pulled off a shock 2-0 win against Lyon. The home side have now lost 3 straight in the league. The last time that happened, Bruno Genesio took over as manager. And that's all for the news for now. But for all the latest in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this week looking ahead at a big match on Wednesday night between Paris Saint-Germain and Real Madrid. The league leaders travelled to Spain and prepared for that with a 1-0 win. Rich, was it more of a matter of time in this game against Toulouse, or did the the home side at least, give them a real stern test? It was certainly a day where Alban Lafont was possibly the most important man for Le Violet.
It was one of those games, I think, where perhaps the scoreline would indicate that Toulouse caused them some problems. They caused them some problems in so much as it was a relatively organised defensive performance, and as you say, Lafont was in great form. It was quite a typical PSG performance, where they dominated. They had lion's share of possession. They had umpteen shots compared to Toulouse. It was just one of those games where, for whatever reason, I think we can probably point it to the mind was on the Champions League game upcoming, that they just weren't able to finish them off. It took a relatively fortuitous goal to secure the points, but it was not their strongest team. There were several players playing purely, I would imagine, to rest a couple of key players ahead of that game against Madrid. It's a performance that's not going to cause PSG too many sleepless nights, because obviously they've now got the bigger picture to come.
Yeah, there's certainly bigger fish to fry coming this week. But I want to take your take on the game, at least at the weekend first, Peter. I mean, it was Neymar who, again, was the sort of standout player again. He was creating a lot of opportunities. He was unlucky on a couple of occasions, a couple of little ones where it's very close and Alban Lafont simply being in the way. He's going to be the key man again at the weekend. But were you surprised that he started in this one and played pretty much the entire game as well? It didn't give him a rest before them for a big midweek clash?
A little bit surprised. I think Emery would be keen to build up some momentum ahead of the game, try and keep the players ticking over. Of course, there's the risk, as you pointed out, and Rich pointed out as well, that it may take their eye off the ball with Real Madrid coming up. So yeah, I was a little bit surprised, but then again, the idea that Unai Emery has enough authority to substitute Neymar is also equally far-fetched. So yeah, I think in terms of how PSG approached it, I think as Emery said, it was quite a professional display. They got the job done. Could have been a lot more goals, as Rich was saying. Alban Lafont was in great form. I mean, a lot of the attempts that PSG did have on goal just seemed to hit him. He just seemed to be there, right place, right time. There was a great save to deny Mbappe as well, diving to his right. I think PSG perhaps would have liked to have been more comfortable. I think then maybe Emery may have considered rotation. It was only 1-0, and I think he's still keen to ensure that they maintain their title focus as much as possible. But we all know that the real focus this season is the Champions League, and it's such a huge game on Wednesday night, and it's going to be an absolute cracker. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, and let's start talking about that cracker that's coming really on Wednesday now. We'll shift our focus now onto that big game. And let's focus on PSG to start off with, because Real Madrid have had troubles recently, and we'll sort of get into that in a little moment. But there will be a couple of selection issues, really, for Unai Emery ahead of this one, Rich. It's a difficult one, because you think of the players that they've tried to rest at the weekend. You think of Cavani, obviously, will be coming back in. You also look at maybe that midfield. They'll try and mix it up a little bit. They tried different things like Lo Celso, and Lassana Diarra was in there for a bit. It's still uncertain whether Thiago Motta will be absolutely back for this one. It's not a guarantee. So it adds another sort of string to this one, really. You think of the weekend they started with Diarra, Rabiot and Lo Celso in the middle. They brought on Verratti and Pastore. They obviously got involved. How would you mix that midfield? Should Thiago Motta not make this game, how do you think the best setup for them will be against what can be at Real Madrid, even with two men in midfield in Kroos and Modric, one of the best midfields in the world?
Well, I think in recent weeks, Lo Celso has probably played himself into contention. I think when the draw was first made, I don't think many would have thought that would be the case. But I think over the last few weeks, I've been really impressed with how he's played. Verratti obviously will start, so there's no question about that, which then leaves maybe a final spot. So I personally think Emery will go for it and go with Verratti, Lo Celso and Rabiot as the midfield three. I don't think Motta would be fit. Even if he was, I still wouldn't be playing him in this game. I know you need in this game you're going to need a midfield that's going to dominate, as you rightly pointed out. Madrid have got some fantastic midfielders themselves, but I'm just not sure Motta has got it anymore, especially at this level. Yes, he's got the experience. Yes, he's got that sort of incredible levels of almost slyness that can see you through these kind of games against the likes of Real Madrid. But I just don't think he has it in him. So my personal preference would be I'd like to see Lo Celso, Verratti and Rabiot. I have a feeling Diarra will start, just to perhaps give a bit more protection to that defence. But I'm just not sure if he's... he certainly wouldn't be lasting the 90 minutes. And maybe the fact that Diarra was one of the midfielders sacrificed just after the hour mark at the weekend is an indication that maybe Diarra is in line for a start on Wednesday.
And that's really the interesting balancing act that Paris Saint-Germain have in this game, because you take on the fact that Real Madrid haven't been the greatest this season, especially recently. They got a good result of the weekend that's sort of seen them bounce back a little bit, but they've been certainly in different form in La Liga. They've looked a bit poor defensively, even against weaker teams. So do you try and take the game to them, even though it's at the Santiago Bernabeu, and you risk really against a team that has the attacking threat that they have really struggling, or do you go for that security of having Diarra in there, maybe even having Lo Celso in there as well, who has played more defensively recently, and Rabiot, maybe risk taking someone like Verratti out and literally play with those attacking three maybe? And I want to throw that question to you really, Peter. Do you think that Diarra is the most likely to see in there, and also then moving further forward, because there has been a case for Angel Di Maria to start with his recent performances and good results, and he was another who was taking off at the weekend instead of Neymar and Mbappe. Do you think he might also be someone who maybe has a start in front of someone like Mbappe?
Yeah, I think on the Diarra point, I think it's really fascinating because it's an area we've been plugging up all season. We pointed out at the end of the transfer window. It's the one area that really does stick out in this PSG team as quite almost a sore thumb. I mean, I feel like this game will really expose it. And I agree with Rich that Lo Celso has played himself into contention. But the fact that you're considering a player like Giovanni Lo Celso to play in the defensive role in that midfield against Real Madrid, I think is quite extraordinary. He's very much an attacking player. He's at his best when he's in the final third. I mean, the way they could work, Rabiot, Verratti, Lo Celso, I mean, none of them really want to be the linchpin, the holding player. I mean, if they can work as a trio and have an incredible understanding that rotates and pivots and can dance around the Madrid free, then fine, so be it. I can't wait to see it. But at the moment, I haven't seen any evidence that will happen, as well as Lo Celso has played. And it's not like PSG have really been tested in this regard in the centre of the park. And you pointed out earlier, you're playing Toni Kroos, Luka Modric, and Casemiro, assuming in that holding role. These, especially Kroos and Modric, they are probably the best two central midfielders in the game. Modric, unquestionably. And to not have that sort of linchpin, I think, is almost crazy. So I think Diarra's signing was purely with this in mind. I think Emery knows it. I think PSG know it. And I think, reluctantly, most of their supporters will admit it as well. They do have this hole that, with Motta injured, Motta's getting old, and he does have, he's almost beyond this level, as Rich said. Diarra's not fit. I think against Toulouse, he gave the ball away. Well, he made 5 errors, I think. I've got some stats in. Lost 40% of his duels, which is not what you want in the run-up to a big game. And if he's the man they're looking at, I imagine it may be Lo Celso, and maybe they will try it. But do you take the game to Real Madrid? Yes, they have been underperforming in La Liga, but you start leaving spaces and suddenly you're exposed. I mean, against Toulouse, Dani Alves looked slightly off the pace. Max Gradel had him on toast at times on that left-hand side, which was really unexpected. And if you're suddenly up against someone like Gareth Bale, who really does have a bucket load of pace, then there's another area that could be exposed. And if you don't have that sort of insurance cover, the like that Casemiro can give Real Madrid, which is why I feel that Real Madrid have been so dominant, is they've had this excellent balance in the side that they didn't have before Zidane came in. So PSG, it's definitely a weakness. I think Real Madrid will probably look to expose it. And if Lo Celso does get the nod, I really hope for his sake that he's able to, rise to the occasion and prove me wrong with everything I'm saying. But yeah, Di Maria as well, of course, he definitely is in with a shout. I think Mbappe, he's come under some more slightly unfair criticism. I mean, it's based on the standards he's set himself, but in terms of what his output is, it's not what you want necessarily. But I mean, Di Maria's in contention, but I don't think he's ever going to start because of the investment they've made in Neymar and Mbappe. I mean, that's why they've spent the money. And unless Emery thinks he can put Mbappe through the middle, which they haven't really tried that often this season. I mean, Mbappe and Cavani do interchange positions during games. I think as a trio, the marketing campaigns, MCN, it's all about those three together. So as much as Di Maria has done well and looks like all of a sudden out of nowhere he's interested in playing football again, I think Mbappe is still set to play, and I think with games as big as this, you do step up to the mark. So I think we will see that.
Yeah, that was the funny thing, really, with Mbappe playing instead of Cavani in what looked like at least a central area, but for the majority of that game, it almost played with no centre forward. That's maybe why they really struggled. Let's talk about form for both teams going into this one, and obviously I'll focus on PSG first with you, Rich. They've won 6 of the last games since that Lyon defeat that surprised everyone. They've won every single game relatively comfortably, although some may argue that, such as the Rennes game in the Cup, wasn't the most comfortable victory in the end, at least anyway. They come into it in good form, players fit, other than Thiago Motta, which isn't too much of a disappointment. They rested a couple of defenders as well. Thiago Silva was rested. They might also bring in Thomas Meunier, thinking that he's maybe a little bit better defensively minded than Dani Alves, and he was skinned by Max Gradel that would put the fear in God in you when you think he might be facing Gareth Bale or Cristiano Ronaldo come midweek. What do you think? Some of the talk ahead of this game, obviously talking about Real Madrid's form, which we'll mention a bit later, but mentioning that PSG's forms may be a little bit of a misnomer given the teams they've played. I mean, in the league, it's Lille, Toulouse, and a victory over Montpellier. They're not exactly the most attacking sides at the same time. Do you think that sort of lack of competition, you may say, in these games, their other 2 wins are, against Sochaux, we've mentioned the Rennes one, which is probably the most difficult out of all of them, and then the Guingamp win in the Cup as well. Is that maybe a misnomer that maybe these big games, can they really get themselves up for them if they've not played a really competitive match in a month? Some would argue, at least anyway.
Well, I think that's a problem that PSG coaches, and by coaches I mean Emery and Blanc before him, have really had to solve. We know that they're going to walk over the majority of the teams in the league, whether the end result shows it or not. We know that they're going to win these games. So we know that the problem for those coaches has always been to G up the team for these big European matches. Arguably, that has been their downfall in the last few seasons. But I think what I've noticed or seen, certainly with a lot of these PSG performances, is whereas in seasons gone by, that match against Toulouse was almost the norm kind of performance, where it was a case of just about doing enough to get the win and not really, sort of slipping it into second gear and, cruising to a win in that regard. What I've seen a lot more this season is they're actually, getting much more closer to top gear for the majority of the game. Hence why we're seeing, such significant score lines that we've seen with PSG this season. So I think that may be a slight difference in their attitude, is that they've realised that they can't afford to just take a win for granted in the league, because, of course, that then affects your mentality, and you struggle, I think, then to G yourself up for the big games. I think Emery has, and I'll give Emery credit here, I think what he's managed to get from his squad is a need to impress, throughout the games against the so-called lesser teams, but also then in the bigger games as well. So I think that slight tweaking mentality that I think I've seen this season could bode them well, because that certainly has played a part in their downfall and failure to sort of progress to the real latter stages in the Champions League over the last few seasons. So I think with that kind of, it's a more professional attitude, I suppose. It allows them to retain the focus, retain that positive feeling that a big win can generate, even for the players that PSG have got, and how used they are to winning these games. Getting a big win under your belt is going to be a great feeling for any player. For you can be the player for the team at the very bottom, or you can be someone like Neymar. A 4-0 win, 5-0 win, 4-1 win is going to be it's going to give you a good feeling. If you're playing well, your team's playing well, you're getting those really standout results. It keeps that positive feeling going. It keeps that desire going to go out there, to impress, to be at your best. This is really the first game Neymar will have to really show, right, well, this is, I joined PSG for, whatever the reasons they were. I want to have a team that's molded around me. I want to be a Ballon d'Or winner. This is his first opportunity to show that on a truly global scale. Hey, look, I've left Barcelona and this is my team, and we'll show you what we've got. So I think all of that together, I think, should mean that we're going to see a much more professional PSG in these stages of the Champions League.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it, really? Because the real focus as well, because we've mentioned before that Paris Saint-Germain in these big games really need to step it up, and this is possibly the biggest chance they've had in a long while, because you look at Real Madrid's form recently, really, Peter, and it's being kindly, is saying it's not been the best, really. They've struggled for results. They drew 2-2 against Levante the other week. They're a good 12, 14 points off the top of the table, and they're still lagging behind the likes of Atletico Madrid and Valencia, although the third side of those are also starting to drop points. They've had Cristiano Ronaldo not quite in form, although he responds to that with a hat-trick at the weekend. They've got players that aren't really, the defence is struggling. I mean, they still conceded 2 at the weekend, even in that 5-2 victory. So there is still fears there, really. Is this, especially against one of the real big names in European football, is this possibly Paris Saint-Germain's best chance at qualifying? I know people might point out that the winning against Barcelona, they should have qualified last season, but this is a real big opportunity for them.
Yeah, I think they'll go to the Bernabeu and they'll smell blood, and I think they'll have that. Real Madrid will have the impression that they're underperforming. The atmosphere there is notoriously. I unapologetic at times, I think, in their sometimes the way they get on the backs of their players. So I feel like certainly it's the best time to play Real Madrid, but at the same time you are playing Real Madrid. I mean, we're talking about a team that has won the Champions League back-to-back. The team hasn't changed drastically in that time. Yes, a couple are getting a little older. Ronaldo, you could argue, is getting on a bit, but his form has picked up of late. I mean, he went through a terrible run of form at the start of the season. I think it was something like 4 in 14 in terms of goal return, which is just unheard of for someone who normally chips in such high numbers. But we're beginning to see a little bit of an upturn. I think defensively, Real Madrid have always been an attacking side. They tend to leave the back door ajar at least. I think I was reading something earlier that actually suggested that defensively they've actually been more solid in terms of the shots and chances they're actually giving away, which suggests it's the other end of the field that's been the problem. But you can't deny the fact that they are struggling. I mean, they are a good way off Barcelona. They're still 10 points behind Atletico Madrid, and they're in second. Title race is gone. They got dumped out of the cup. Everything for them is relying on the Champions League. And I think Zidane will know that as well. I mean, Zidane, by Real Madrid standards, has lasted longer this season than most, considering the circumstances of how the season has gone. Understandably so. And you'd think, well, how on earth could you get rid of a manager who's won back-to-back Champions Leagues? But this is Real Madrid. So with that in mind, Real Madrid go into the game knowing that their season also depends on this game. So we're not just talking about PSG. We know that PSG, their whole way of being and their whole focus is winning the Champions League. But right now, Real Madrid have also got that same focus. And when you're dealing with the caliber of players you're looking at, as we mentioned the midfielders before, going forward, Ronaldo, of course, Bale, those options are extraordinarily talented, and you don't lose that. It doesn't just go away. And I think we will see that. I think we will see a Real Madrid that will be determined to prove that they can still compete and that they can defeat the pretenders, which is what PSG are essentially, to their a trophy that is for them is theirs. But I think I think as much as Real Madrid have underperformed, I expect to see a much stronger performance on Wednesday.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, Ronaldo is still the top scorer in the Champions League this season. He scored absolutely bucket loads of goals in that, and some may again argue the level of competition that they faced. Well, they faced Tottenham and Borussia Dortmund, and they came through that eventually. But it's a massive game for both clubs now. Given, like you say, given that Real Madrid are out of the league title race, they were knocked out of the Copa del Rey. This is all they have now, compared to a Paris Saint-Germain team that feel like this is the only trophy that will give them validation for the money they spend, and also you may argue keep Unai Emery in a job as well. It's a massive game on so many different kinds of fronts, Rich, and these kind of games tend to be really. So let's have a prediction then. It's at the Bernabeu. What do you think it will be?
Ooh, I reckon if I can, I'm going to go with unless you want an actual score, I'm going to go with a score draw. Let's go 2-2. Let's go 2-2 in that first leg.
Peter?
Well, I think there'll be goals. I was going to say 2-2, but I'm going to be different. I'm going to go 3-2 Real Madrid.
I'm going to go for a cagey 1-1, where a classic sort of big tie game where maybe Paris Saint-Germain scoring within the first 20 minutes after a good start, and then Real Madrid in the second half just early on, and then it sort of ebbs and flows, but it never really quite catches fire as we expect it to. But it's a massive game for everyone. I mean, thinking of, at least from the French side, Paris Saint-Germain have been working to this. This is why they spent all the money. If Unai Emery loses this, even though it's the Real Madrid, the team that have won it twice in a row, is his job under threat? Well, that's maybe something we'll talk about. Should they lose that game? We'll keep that one on our pockets for now, at least anyway. But let's focus on domestic matters at least now for a bit. And Sunday didn't come with the spectacle that we've had for the last few weeks, but there were certainly some talking points. And I want to start with you on this one, Rich, because Lyon were the Ligue darlings really just under a month ago when they did beat Paris Saint-Germain. And now they're the ones trailing in the hunt for the Champions League places, with both Marseille having a bit of a joint on second place the last couple of weeks, and now Monaco back in that place as well. But what's happened to Ligue? And they've just really fell off the horse. Really, 3 defeats in a row is for this team since Hubert Fournier was in charge. It's unheard of.
They just really seem to, and I think I've touched on this in a recent show as well. They really just seem to have a struggle in finding a plan B. In the game on Sunday, Rennes came up with a clear game plan that they were going to be quite defensively minded. They were going to be organised. They were going to be solid. They were going to make it as difficult as possible for Lyon to break them down and get in on goal. There was an early goal for Rennes, which I think probably took Lyon by a great surprise. But as soon as that goal went in, it just felt like Lyon, for all the possession they had, for all the shots they had, for all the chances they created, it just never felt like they had that plan B. Right, this is how opponents are now going to set up. We need to alter our style of play. I've been a big defender of Bruno Genesio over his sort of tenure as coach of Lyon, but this is really now starting to become a bit of a problem. And I think if Lyon do want to take that next step, which in Aulas's mind is to become almost a challenger to PSG domestically, Genesio is going to have to work out what that plan B is and work out very, very quickly, because it's now becoming a real problem. We've seen that, I think, in certainly the defeat to Rennes, I think the defeat to Bordeaux as well. They just struggled to work out how to change their game plan to match the circumstances of the game. Last night the game against Rennes, Mariano Diaz wasn't at his best, but he's their only real senior centre forward. He was then taken off at half time. Memphis was brought on and Aouar was brought on, but it just didn't feel like they knew what they were going to do to break down, or how they were going to break down Rennes and get back in the game. They really seemed to struggle. I think there was I can't remember who they interviewed after the game. It might have been Lucas Toussaint at half time, actually, who identified that very problem, that Rennes had come with a clear game plan to be organised, to be defensively minded, and I swear it was Toussaint was saying that we need to work out a way to do that. Well, that should have been worked out, and that sort of plan should be in place before kickoff, that you can then react mid-game to a change in circumstance or a developing circumstance. So Genesio's got some real work to do, because I think there's now starting to be a real growing discontent with him in charge, that they've got a man who, knows the club, knows a lot of these young players, but is not tactically advanced enough to take this Lyon side to where the fans and ultimately Aulas will want them to go.
And that's the thing we've criticised him in the past, really, is that we felt like he's not quite the man for the job. It seemed like that last season. It felt like in the summer that was maybe the ideal time to think, well, this certainly maybe needs to change. They decided to stick with it. It didn't go great to start off with. It slowly built momentum, but you always felt it was the quality of the players that was shining through rather than his tactics. And I think that's starting to show now that they're unable to do something different. Like you say, Rich, they're not able to change games with substitutions. They're not changing the game with formations and trying something a little bit different. They're just throwing on the same kind of players to try and do the same kind of job. And teams are figuring it out. I mean, okay, the first 2 losses were away from home. One, look, against a good side in Monaco, and then the second one, you can say, well, Bordeaux are growing in confidence. They've got a new manager bounce, that kind of thing. That sort of excuses them a little bit. But this one at home, where they have so many chances, Peter, and I mean, also what will really annoy the fans will be the 2 goals are incredibly soft. I mean, Marcelo is very much at fault for the first one, and then the second one, there's no one there. It's the easiest goal for Rennes to score in the world. You have to be alarmed by that kind of defending, don't you?
Yeah, I think the first goal, especially. I mean, it is an error by Marcelo, and it's a good finish from Khazri as well. I definitely agree with the Genesio point. It did feel like that the second half last week the Rennes game was a complete carbon copy of the second half of last week against Monaco, where Monaco just sat deep, 2 blocks of 4, shut down the central areas, and then hit them on the break. And that's exactly what Rennes did. I mean, you didn't even have to do much research to work out how to play against Lyon. You just have to watch the game and then realize you do the same. And Lyon didn't create anything differently. And I think there is a point about Mariano Diaz. I mean, he was dreadful. And then Genesio seemed to give the impression that he was changing things radically with his double substitution at half time, as if to say, look at me, this is a plan B. I've seen the criticisms from before. This is what I'm going to do. Comes out and it's exactly the same thing again. That said, though, I mean, they did waste a number of really good opportunities. Depay wasted 2 fantastic chances. They also should have had a penalty, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, which was an absolute joke. So, I mean, when you balance that out, then you think, okay, well, maybe it's not as bad. But when you actually look at how they play, as Rich was saying, there is no alternative. There is no plan B. And just going back to whether that means should they have looked elsewhere with Genesio, potentially. I think I'm erring on the side of caution a little bit. It is 3 defeats in a row. The worrying side, of course, is the lack of change or the lack of direction. And I feel like, you know, that this is definitely the biggest moment for Genesio in his time at Lyon, because really, with the talent they've got, they should be waltzing towards the Champions League spot. We've seen what they can do. So yeah, it's an interesting moment, and I think defensively, as we're going back to the original point, I was just trying to work my way back to the original point. Yeah, they are a cause for concern. I think Morel and Marcelo in the last couple of games have underperformed, definitely, by the standards that they set at the start of the season. The errors creeping in. Last week against Monaco, a couple of times Morel and Marcelo both guilty of it. Marcelo for the Ronnie Lopez winner, just handing the ball to the opposition. It's careless. But I think that's also partly due to, going back to the point about tactical naivety, teams working out how Lyon play. They've realised that they don't need to press Marcelo and Morel because on the ball, they're not as competent as, say, when they get it quickly into the midfield, into Toussaint or to Fekir or to Ndombele or Aouar, or out in the fullbacks, where they're very effective. I've been impressed with Ferland Mendy. He is error prone, and his runs forward do leave them relatively exposed. But you know, we've seen that there is a proneness to error, and it's been sussed out by opposition. And again, it does come back to Genesio and saying, what can you do differently? And we wait to see. He's got to do it quickly, especially with the run-out derby coming up. And Saint-Etienne are looking a lot more stubborn than they were a few weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Can someone teach Memphis Depay how to head a ball? Because the header he has for that open chance where the ball is in the air for so long, he has absolutely all the time in the world to work out how to properly jump, for starters, because he flies with his legs under his bum like he's trying to go for a dive into a pool. And then he heads it straight into the ground. Yes, we want you to head it downwards because that's a difficult one to the goalkeeper, but not directly into the floor below your feet. It's not how you head a ball. It was a pretty abysmal one. You tell why he's not a central striker or anything like that. As someone who loved to score headed goals when I was younger, I was incredibly offended by that moment of football, really. Let's talk about that penalty incident that Peter briefly mentioned there, Rich. It's a pretty shocking one, really. I think most people have seen it by now. In fact, Fekir's wandered into the box and is completely taken out, and the referee doesn't... Okay, in fairness to the referee, maybe he can't quite see it from the angle he's looking at, but the linesman certainly can see that one, and neither of them give it him. Fekir berates the linesman. The referee says, it's my decision. I decided not to give it, and how he's decided not to give it, we will never really know.
I saw it at the wall. I was watching the game and saw it happen, and immediately I thought, "Oh, this looks quite a controversial call." And as Fekir is sort of complaining to the assistant referee, I'm thinking, well, you know, maybe my sort of Fekir's reputation has preceded him a little bit here, and maybe all these maybes to it. And then you see a replay, and you realise there isn't really any maybes. There's really no question to be asked there. It's a penalty. It's probably as clear a decision as you're ever going to see. Jelan just didn't get out of the way, stuck his leg across. didn't appear to be too much of a hint of a sort of what I would call a pre-dive from Fekir of going looking for it. He played the ball past Gelin, didn't play it miles past him to try and entice a foul, just played it past him to go around him, and Gelin just stepped across him. Incredibly clear cut. And, I speak as a Rennes fan that was incredibly clear cut. So it was a baffling decision. I think made all the more comical then by a later, slightly half-hearted appeal when Traoré was through on goal and fell in the box, only for replays to show that he was tripped up by Maxwell Cornet, his teammate, which I thought was quite a comic turn of events for Cornet, who really had a torrid time last night. But the decision itself, it's only going to make the calls for the video replays to be recommissioned, for the LFP to hurry up with their review of it's the tender, isn't it? They've put it out for that comes back, because with the video replays in place, that's a penalty, and that changes the game.
Yeah, and it's a big call, and we'll probably discuss about referees a little bit later, because they don't stop coming at French football at the moment. It seems that we'll keep focus on this game really, and I want to talk about Lyon ahead. They've got their own European escapade really on Peter on Thursday night. They play Villarreal, who've been in okay form, but they've lost their big striker who used to play in France, Cedric Bakambu, who's headed to China. It's still it's a difficult game, certainly, because these Yellow Submarines always give you a tough game and have a good few number of players. Fornals and a couple of others in that Villarreal side have been really impressive this season. But it's still a good chance for them to possibly, if the form in the league is tailing off and there's a real competition for that second and third spot, really, that the Europa League could be a really good opportunity for them, and we'll come on to Marseille as well, to get themselves back into the Champions League without having to have that dogfight in the league.
Yeah, I mean, they've slipped 6 points now behind the automatic Champions League group stage spot, so maybe there is some consideration. And looking at in terms of the actual team itself, and you think Lyon, especially when in the height of their good form, would actually have a really good shot at going for the title. I do think the Villarreal will give them a really tough test, though. It's another really enticing tie between La Liga and Ligue. Two similar sides, actually. I mean, they're both a few points off the Champions League spot. I mean, Villarreal have sort of nosedived a little bit since Bakambu has left. But they've got a young manager. It's good to see them at the top end of the table again. And, I think Lyon, I don't think going out at this stage would necessarily be a bad thing. I think especially when you're up against Monaco, who have no European commitments at all. And I think that will be really, really key for as long as they stay in, as both Marseille and Lyon stay in the Europa League. That could be the difference. But yeah, no, I think we've got another good tie on our hands, another good clash, and I feel like for Genesio, it's an opportunity to really, close the book on the recent form and try and start afresh. It'll be a different style of play, a different pace to the game. But Lyon in general have done quite well in the Europa League. They had a tough group with Everton and Atalanta, and they came through that relatively unscathed. So they can definitely compete at this level. And, I think from the outside and from after the start to the season, Lyon supporters are probably looking at them and going, last year we got to semi-finals. This year we can go on and get to the final and potentially win it. And that's a realistic expectation. And the players they've got, the caliber of Fekir and the youngsters like Aouar and Dembele and the front three, whoever they are, when they're on form, can be potent. So, yeah, I think Lyon will look at this and think, yeah, it's a route into the Champions League. And it'd be great for French football as well if they can go on and do well.
Absolutely. And I couldn't finish off the segment that involved Rennes, really, Rich, without talking about their good victory. Again, it was Wabi Kazri scoring a nice goal. Lea Saliki scored the second, and he had a solid game. Great to see him back in the starting lineup. But did it feel again like Rennes playing up a level against one of the bigger teams rather than sort of when they have recently, at least anyway, played sort of down a level when they're playing the smaller teams and they've come unstuck?
Yeah, it was another classic Rennes performance against the bigger teams. It's now going to give plenty of Rennes fans, myself included, this renewed optimism going into future games. Oh well, look at what they did against Lyon, and we'll go and lose at home to Angers or something like that. And I've lost track of the amount of times that we've seen these sort of mini false storms with Rennes, but taking the performance in isolation, it was a really good performance. I thought they were really organised. Really, really hoping to see the defensive pairing of Gnagnon and Jalin grow. Hopefully, both of them can stay at the club for at least a couple more seasons, because they're starting to look like a really, really sound young defensive partnership. Lea Saliki, sort of rumours of a little bit of discontent behind the scenes and a bit of behaviour issues, but he came back into the side, played really well. And Ben Sebaini almost looked like a competent left back. There was a couple of moves where he really put Kenny Tete on the back foot. But no, it was a really, really good performance, I thought. But I'm desperately trying to not let myself get too carried away.
Yeah, I really hope those rumours about Lea Saliki having a bit of an attitude, he hopefully can sort of address those, because he's a talented footballer, and it'd be a shame for him to waste any of that. Another team in European action will be Marseille, who couldn't quite nudge past Saint-Etienne on Friday night to try and stay in that second place that they had garnered. Peter, in this one, they went ahead nice and early, but were pegged back. They got themselves back in front, but they slowly sort of petered off, and Saint-Etienne slowly built to the goal they did eventually score. Did it feel like Marseille maybe took their foot off the gas on this one?
Yeah, that hits the nail on the head, absolutely. I think at 2-1, the game just began to just slow down. The tempo was taken out of it. Marseille lost their impetus, and you felt like, because Saint-Etienne hadn't created very much at all in that second period, they weren't offering very much going forward. Beric had come on and was shuffling about a bit and causing a few difficulties. And then just before the goal, you just felt like, if they get one chance at Saint-Etienne, they're probably going to take it. And they had a plan B, which Lyon don't. They got it wide, whipped the cross in, and there was Beric to chest it into the net. I think there's certainly the element of taking a foot off the gas, but when they took it up again at 2-2, when they went after the winner, they created chances again. But unfortunately, they brought on Kostas Mitroglou, which is actually like going down to 10 men, as it so proved when he missed that absolute shocker again. I mean, it's countless. He's missed so many. I mean, the points he's costing Marseille, as well as money, is quite extraordinary. Again, 100% should have finished it. Not easy. I mean, it's coming down from in the air, but when you're spending that much money on a forward, and admittedly his confidence. Well, we say his confidence. He scored a hat trick the other week, didn't he? Mm. So, well, it's that's one area that Garcia is probably thinking. Well, he's looking at it and going, "Can I get anything from him, or can I offload him as fast as possible?" I mean, Germain is now starting, and G is now first choice substitute. I don't think it'll be long before we see Mitroglou in the reserves.
It's a frustrating one, isn't it? We mentioned, I think I was on the preview show, that it maybe gave Mitroglou that little boost to get that hat trick with a Campos in that cup game, in that 9-goal thriller against Bourg-en-Bresse, that maybe that would give him the boost to start kicking on. But he had that opportunity from a couple of yards out, and he absolutely blazed it over. But also, Rich, there was a couple of opportunities late on. Florian Thauvin had that chance that is, in fairness, wonderfully slaved by Stéphane Ruffier, who's one of the best in French football, really, in fairness. But it still feels like, even though Saint-Etienne are maybe starting to have the green shoots of revival, that this was a big miss for them to remain in second place. And again, a couple of little mistakes here, a couple of defensive lapses for both the goals have cost them big.
Yeah, especially when when hindsight takes over, and I don't think many would have predicted Rennes to win in Lyon, but with the hindsight that Lyon defeat would have gone to show, it would have been a big, Marseille will think this is a big opportunity missed. Saint-Etienne, as you say, are better than where they were, but are still nowhere near where they should be, or performing at the level that they should be. and as Peter pointed out, Mitroglou, I mean, he spent more time, I think, during that opportunity checking whether he was onside or offside. Whereas, you see any top quality centre forward, they put the ball in the back of the net, then check whether they were onside or offside. Yet again, it felt like it was another Tovan-driven performance. Lost track of the amount of times that we've said that, and I'm a sort of self-confessed sort of turnaround of my opinion on Tovan. But yeah, I think Marseille, looking at that now, if they'd have taken all 3 points against Saint-Etienne, all of a sudden that keeps them in second. It puts significant daylight between them and Lyon. It's going to be something I think that will play on Rudy Garcia's mind, and it may, as Peter said, it may be the last time that we see Mitroglou for quite a while.
Yeah, it was pretty awful. And I just want to thank our editors, really, for giving me the assist of posting my Florian Thauvin piece maybe about 30 minutes before he scores his goal in the first 5 minutes of that game as well. But an interesting one. Again, they're in European action the midweek as well against Braga. That'll be a really interesting game, who are doing pretty well in the Portuguese league, bar the obvious top three that tend to dominate football in that region. But I do want to actually focus very quickly, really, Peter, on that fight for third, because both, like we mentioned, Marseille and Lyon have Europa League commitments, at least for the next 2 weeks, really, and that will also possibly be in the face of Marseille, who then have to face, after those games, a game against Paris Saint-Germain, the Parc des Princes, and then they have to play them again in midweek in a cup game for the Coupe de France as well. It's getting a little bit clustered for some of these teams. That Monaco now back in the driving seat, having beaten Lyon and the Angers win, while the other two drop points. Are they now the favourites for that second place?
Well, you'd think so, especially with the fixture pile-up set to come into play. But as we've seen this season, it does seem to go in swings and roundabouts. I mean, 1 minute we're talking about Monaco in decline, the project's at risk. The next week it's Lyon. Next, I think Marseille are next up for a fall. So I feel like it does go in cycles. But at this point, as we look at it, it does feel like Monaco are certainly in the ascendancy. And I think the risk with playing in the Europa League is that you could end up with a bad draw. I mean, going to Braga is not bad, and neither is going to Villarreal. But if you end up like Nice and have to travel to Lokomotiv Moscow, suddenly you've got a draining trip on your hands. And these things do take their toll. There's no question about that. And you look at the squads, do they have the depth to compete? I would say Marseille probably, you could make a case, I think. Certainly. They have options going forward. Lyon, meanwhile, are quite reliant on a couple of key players. I mean, in midfield, they have rotation. But, I mean, we're looking at Mariano Diaz. We're looking at Nabil Fekir. I mean, if they lose one of those two in, say, a European trip, or they have to rest one of them for whatever reason, it will undermine whichever tournament they're going after. So I think Marseille perhaps are a little bit better equipped. I think I say that tentatively. But I think certainly when we're looking at the race of the top three, it's got to be Monaco as almost your steadfast at present. But then, of course, the flip side is, if you go on and win the Europa League, suddenly you've got a Champions League spot. So I think it'll be a case of testing the waters these next few games. If Lyon can get past Villarreal, okay, maybe we'll think about going on a little bit further. And the same with Marseille, the same kind of mindset about how far they can go in the competition.
Yeah, it will certainly become interesting as those games start to come thick and fast. And one other side that are involved in European competition is as you mentioned there, Peter, is Nice, who head to Lokomotiv Moscow. But they had a really interesting isn't really the right word. Disgusting is probably the exact right word we should be using in this incident that happened in the game against Dijon. It ended a 3-2 result to the home side, but that was really completely overshadowed by the referee giving Mario Balotelli a yellow card for complaining about racist abuse from the stands. It's also been revealed by Kick It Out today, the English organisation against racism in football here in England. They have contacted their European partners to discuss this issue and how this can be addressed. It's a real terrible moment, really, for Rich, for the referee. He's given a yellow card for something that he absolutely should be respecting Balotelli and anything he's saying, even if he does think anything is stopping the game or anything like that. This should have been treated in the right way, and the referee has got this absolutely 100% completely wrong, hasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. It's on him now. I think we saw in the aftermath of the Tony Chaperon incident, he was severely brought to task. This referee now needs to come out and explain why has he done that? Why has he shown that yellow card? Did he not hear anything? Has he just blankly dismissed Balotelli's claims of what happened? Has Balotelli himself said something to the referee? We need an explanation, and it needs to be coming pretty soon, because we're now a couple of days gone from the game, and there's no clear explanation as to why Balotelli has been shown a yellow card in the face of what he's claimed he's been the victim of.
Can I chip in quickly? Because I tried to watch the incident, because it is so bizarre when it was something that happened in Italy as well to Suleiman Tari for this kind of incident. And obviously, it looks absolutely awful, but I just wonder, because I was watching it through, and it's because I don't know if this is the case, and that may be completely wrong, and we just it is the case that he is just booking him because of remonstrations directly about racism. But I think it's Balotelli's reactions to the crowd that may have led to the booking. It'd be great, as you say, Rich, just to get an explanation to clear this up. But I think it's because what the referee then does, he then books him. Balotelli then continues to talk to him, and then he goes over to a stadium official. And I think I've read it in Ligue that he was saying that they did that to make an announcement about that kind of thing. So it was reported straight away to the stadium official. That's definitely happened. Whether the booking is directly because of that or because of his remonstrations to the crowd, which I think may come under goading the crowd sort of thing. So plainly he didn't hear it, the referee. But it'd be really good, as you say, to get some clarity on that, because from the outside perspective, and when you first time you look at it, you think, well, why on earth is he booking him if he's complaining about some kind of abuse from the crowd? So
well, I think the only
to see his reveal. Sorry.
I think the only reason that I would be a little concerned whether there's truth in that being the referee side of things is, if it was, surely we would have heard that by now. Surely that the referee, as soon as this came out, bearing in mind, the Nice's official Twitter account mentioned it at half time in the game. They've had the referee, the LFP, referees union have all had long enough to come out and say, look, I booked him because, at the time he was goading the Dijon fans, but that hasn't come out. If that's the case, that's a simple nip in the bud. Honest misunderstanding. It wasn't for him remonstrating. It was because I believed, that this was happening. I didn't know at the time that was, that he was suffering that abuse.
Or at least publicly, as you said, just publicly come out and say, well, the yellow card's revoked, got it completely wrong. Because that has to happen. At the bottom line, as you say, that has to happen. They have to revoke the yellow card. He hasn't done anything wrong, necessarily. Unless he has done some extreme goading, but judging from the footage, he definitely doesn't do that. So, yeah, they've got to come out and say something. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, because the referee has to understand this a little bit further. And in all honesty, you make a good point there, Peter, about possibly even thinking you might be goading fans. But at the same time, a referee has to understand the scenario that he's in at that moment. If a player looks like he's goading fans, that in my book is not an instant booking. That isn't something that you instantly book a player for, because if it would be in half the games because of celebrations towards opposition fans or anything like that. The referee has to discuss what the player's doing and get that discussion from the player and treat this in a mature manner, regardless of what was doing. If he was just having a laugh with the fans and it was a normal sort of conversation, maybe, then you have a discussion that way. You don't instantly book a player and then wait for the explanation that the fact that he's had to go to an official on the sideline and a stadium official to talk about this before the referee's been able to action it, I think is completely disgusting by the referee. I think the fact that him and the LFP haven't come out and said something about this is shocking and appalling. And in fact, refereeing standards this season have been pretty dire, really. There's been incidents not just from happening on the field, such as penalties not being given or free kicks. The Tony Chaperon incident, this incident now, a lot of the incidents in the recent past with racism and Balotelli and not getting these resolved and games not being cancelled last season with issues of fans and on the pitch and the referees not controlling games. There needs to be something done here. There's too much of this happening. And this isn't the first time Balotelli's mentioned this. This is probably the fourth time that Balotelli's mentioned this happening in French stadiums. It's not good enough. And the fact that a referee decided to do something and act so quickly against him, I think is appalling. There's a great report. I've just seen Johnson before we went on the show that the LFP have had a discussion with the Swiss FA and they're doing some sort of strange exchange policy of referees. Whether that's going to help, but I feel sorry for the Swiss FA because they're not going to get much from that, unfortunately. Hopefully some Swiss referees can bring some actual dignity to this game in French football, because at the moment it's pretty appalling and pretty embarrassing really on what should be a really proud FA and hopefully hopefully we can start stamping this out, because Balotelli is getting this almost, it feels like once is too often. The fact that this has been twice, 3 times, it's not good enough. He needs better protection, and all black players need better protection in French football from this kind of thing, because it needs to be stopped really. But let's simmer down a little bit and do something maybe a little bit more cheerful, at least in Ligue 1, and let's talk about our Ligue 1 snapshots for this week. And I'll start with you, Rich. What's your snapshot?
I've got 2 one very brief one. First one is Morgan Amalfitano, become a figure of fun at Rennes since joining back last January. Whenever he's played for Rennes, whether it's off the bench or from the start, Rennes have never won, and it's become a bit of an ongoing joke that he is this ultra bad luck charm. And I think it was about the 18th game with Rennes having just taken a 2-goal lead in Lyon with 10 seconds left. Sabri Lamouchi decides to bring Amalfitano on to break the curse. And the look of Khazri, who comes off laughing, and then the look of Amalfitano, to be fair, he was chuckling away as he came on. Was quite a picture. So that was quite fun to finally see that curse broken. And then the second one, apologies both, because I may be nabbing it, is the Toulouse troll cam. We saw it in action, in fine action. I don't know. I hadn't seen it before. I don't know if it's a new thing or not. But with the visit to PSG, it got a good outing of almost like a Mickey Take version of almost like the Kiss Cam, I suppose. Going around the stadium, just putting funny captions underneath people in the stands. A couple of captions that I did quite like the look of was a couple of the PSG fans were picked out with things like "Never been to Parc des Princes." One of my favourite was a picture of a Lyon fan with supported Lyon in 2000. One's about they'll wear a Payet shirt when Marseille come to town. And then probably my favourite one was they just showed a picture of Lassana Diarra, which I thought was very funny. I don't think PSG fans will necessarily take that in good taste, but it was very, very funny if you can see it.
Yeah, I really loved it. I did the troll cam. I think it's something they should bring out more often, really. And I thought it was fantastic to see so many Toulouse fans really turn out. Sometimes that stadium can look so bare, but that South Curve looked fantastic at the weekend with that visit of Paris, and hopefully that performance didn't deter them from turning up a little bit more in their numbers more regularly. Peter, what's your snapshot this week?
Mine is Strasbourg's win over Troyes on Sunday. A huge relegation 6-pointer. Both sides promoted last season. And it was a big win for Strasbourg. They've only won once since the turn of the year. You get just on a point where you feel like you can slip into a bad cycle. Especially they've got Monaco, Caen, and Monaco coming up, as well as and Montpellier, as well as a cup match. They're still in the French Cup in the quarterfinal. A huge result to beat Troyes. Goals from Black and Ahoulou, who's been outstanding for them in holding midfield. I've felt this season. It takes them to 30 points. they were helped also by Mongan going off early. I'm not a fan of him at centre half. He's got errors in him all over the place. But yeah, huge win for Strasbourg. Worrying for Troyes. They're now second bottom. It's a big blow. They do have a game in hand, though, which they will definitely hope to win against Dijon, who could easily be sucked further into the relegation mire. But yes, big relegation 6-pointer and a big win for Strasbourg at Le Mans now.
Yeah, absolutely massive win. And I think my League on snapshots is twofold. One will be there was a strange pre-match wrestling at Guingamp for fans to enjoy, which was a bit of a strange one, really. It didn't really get them stirred up for what ended up being a 0-0 result. But some great goalkeeping performances, really. Albon Lafont was pretty good. I thought his reaction save with his feet early on and the save from Mbappe was great. There was a great defensive display from Lecomte as well for Montpellier. He had to make a couple of fine saves against Metz to give Montpellier a good win. And in that Guingamp game, Carl Johan Jonsson, who is a good goalkeeper and had a number of opportunities that I had to stop from Crivelli and Santini in that one to keep that 0-0. I always like a nice, good goalkeeping display, and there was certainly few in Ligue 1 this week. That's all that we have time for. My thanks to Rich, Peter, and everyone listening at home. Join us for the preview show on Thursday, and the main show will be back at the same time, same place next week. A bientôt, and goodbye.